What are we talking about today?
What is the profitable stylist? Here we go this week. What is tension in hair? And what does tension have to do with hair extensions? So that's our topic for this week. We're going to have to break both of them down and figure that out. Bernard, this is what we got.
So, when I first started doing extensions years ago, there was only one kind. It was wefts, and you sewed them on the head. Now, the funny thing is, oh, look, okay. Yeah. So the funny thing is that I feel like hair extensions have come full circle and we're sewing wefts in again or trying to get wefts on the head somehow. And I can't stand the sewing thing. It seems so yesterday. But many
was
people
that a pun?
Yeah, not so much a pun. It was a criticism, a ridicule. But so sewing extensions in has always been around. Always. Putting wefts in, I should say, has always been around, and it lived through everything. I would venture to say worldwide, wefted type of extensions has probably been around the longest and continued to have been done through all the other techniques that have been invented, created, done, made up. And that is a fascinating thing about wefts. And it's probably part of the power of it having this resurgence in a hand tied or waterfall tied technique, right? But the part that I kind of made up was the tension versus no tension. Felt like I made it up. I think other people started using the same things, but I started to realize early on, as the tension got taken away from the scalp, that there was a big difference in the two. And this was my journey along the way. I was putting these wefts in along the head, and I remember hating it so much, but loving the money. Hating doing it because I didn't really like making people hurt or be in pain, and it took so long to do. And there was this cornrow braid, or there was this thing along the scalp. Hey, you can come sit in that chair over here. Just take all those wires off. I forgot my son was joining me today. So
that's cool.
Yeah. So I'm doing all these things to put this tension on the head, a cornrow braid or a thing, just put it on the table. And then I'd put a weft and sew it. And these tied knots would make the tension even more. It was tension on top of tension. I didn't think of it as tension. I just thought of it as putting hair extensions in. And I would tell people, you're going to be in pain for a day or two. Take your aspirin, Tylenol, Advil, whatever, And so I got to the point where I would tell people, all right, when they'd say, so do you guys do hair extensions? I'm like, I do. But listen, it takes a long time. It costs a lot of money and it hurts. Are you sure you want to do this? And so I was the worst salesman in the beginning because I didn't enjoy the pain I was inflicting on people. So I would and this sales technique ended up working. I had no idea that it would work like this because it was almost like that takeaway clothes. Like, I don't know if this is for you. And they're like, no, give me more. And you start to learn these sales techniques the backwards kind of way. But it was mostly because I wasn't charging enough, first of all. So I was resenting the amount of time, and then I didn't like hurting people. And then going like, oh man, it hurts so bad, huh? And I'm like, oh, it goes away in a day or two. So I would get to the point where I'm like, it's going to take a long time, cost a lot of money, and it's going to hurt for a day or two. But this is what the celebrities do. You still want to do it? And they're like, yes.
Yeah, sounds great. Sign me up. You have
great.
Tuesday.
Yeah. So then I raised the prices significantly to get rid of. I think I was at like $300 or $400, and I just doubled it. I went to $600 way back when $600 was a lot for extensions, and then soon after $800, trying to get people like, and if you want it, it's going to be $600. And they're like, okay. Then I was happy to do it. I'm like, it takes me like 3 hours to do. If I did one in the morning, I was so arrogant about it. I would tell my boss at the time, if I take an extension client, I'm working so hard for 3 hours and I made so much money in 3 hours, I'm taking off the rest of the day. Okay. So I would do one at 9 and get off at 12 and I just leave. But I made the owner so much money doing it because it was commission salon that he was okay with it. I'm like, this once or twice a month, I wish I was doing it every day. If I get the opportunity to do this $600 client when haircuts are like $12 for $10 to $12 for a man's haircut, 16, 18 for a woman's cut and style, and now $600 in 3 hours. I'm out of here for the day, And
I have a lot of questions for you, because that's one type of hair extension that you're talking about. That's one example of what you're talking about.
That's where I started.
And that's what you started with. From we got to go back to the origin of it all, of how it all this conversation even keeps coming up all the time. What would you define as tension? Let's start off with a baseline to why why it's so important that what you're talking about matters. So, because it really is important what you're saying, but we got to let everybody's got to get on the same page first and truly understand the issue or what it really means.
Go back to the origin. I think that'd be a much longer story. So let me finish up the tension, non-tension thing real quick, and then we'll go backwards, forward, somewhere in the middle. But soon after I'm doing these tension type of extensions that we just called extensions, we started doing individual type strands. And they started with just cutting hair off the weft, using a hot glue gun and rolling it in. And it was a little bit away from the scalp. And so you literally could hold that extension and like move it, kind of like some of the ones I have here. Let's just give you an example. Here's a keratin bond. It's hard to see because they blend in. I've got two or three round keratin bonds, a flat keratin bond, and a couple of on-stage extensions. They're all individual strands. Let's see if I can show you. They're all individual strands, but they all have a little space between the head and the top of the bond. And so let's take a keratin bond first. So like if I take it, let's see if I can show you. It's got that much space between the keratin bond and the hair. And so do all of these, they've got that little bit of space that it can move. So it's not pulling the hair more than the hair's weight would pull. So, the hair's got a certain amount of weight just hanging from the head, and the root of the hair is holding it in. And then if you add some weight to it, obviously there's going to be some extra weight. So I guess there's no such thing as no tension. But if you're just adding a little bit of weight, but there's that space, we're going to call that no tension, compared to you put a bead in on a head right up next to the head, and you pull hair from a section wide and pull it together and push that bead up till it stops and squeeze it. Now you're pulling hair off of where it wants to hang. You're also putting string in possibly and tying and pulling hair, pulling it harder from the head than it wants to just hang or hold a tiny bit of weight. That's tension versus the individual strands where we used hot glue. Then they put the keratin tips on there, or K-tips or beads, even eye tips. All of those were techniques that hung a little bit away from the scalp. So we called it no tension. But then there's even more minute details after that. But I'm going to let you jump in here first. You done?
It's all I'm digesting, because it's so everything you're saying is so important. It is so vital. Like it really matters a lot. Tension is the pulling, is the stress onto the section of hair, the section of natural hair that the hair extension is attached to. That's what tension is. Okay. Any kind of stress, any kind of pulling, and any kind of directing against natural fall will cause a level of pull, a level of stress, which we refer to as tension. Natural fall is the hair's natural way that it lays. That's what natural fall is. The way it natural falls down off the head.
When it gets to go from the root towards the way gravity is pulling it, that's what we call natural fall, or there's still a bit of tension, right? The weight of the hair, the weight of whatever you hang on it, but at least that's the least stressful on the hair compared to adding a pull type of tension.
Right.
How about the most basic? Let's forget about hair extensions for a minute. A ponytail, a French braid, those are tension.
This is exactly braiding, ponytails. Even if you slick your hair back, like with gel, or just when you get out the shower and your hair is wet and you push it back, or you even wrap it up in a towel, even that in its most simplest form is a type of tension onto the hair that could potentially damage the hair.
And it depends on how thick or thin, how many hairs per square inch, how much damage has been done by color highlights, will determine if that little, medium, or lot of tension is good or bad for the hair, right? And so this is where you add things like styling products, yes, but styling tools. You add heat, it's going to weaken the fiber a little bit more. And so how much heat are you adding? And then how hard are you pressing? And how hard are you pulling?
Are you pulling? Yeah, if you're
Yeah,
brushing.
let's take with a brush, with a hand, with a comb, with the flat iron. Some people squeeze it harder than others, and they're pulling while they're flattening. And some tension, along with pressure and heat, does flatten better. But it
you just made me think of something.
pulls. Go ahead.
Do you ever do this? I was talking to a hairdresser yesterday on the phone, and she said, I need a new tool for my hair extension machine because I keep cracking the wand. And I go, girl, how hard are you freaking squeezing? Like, you do too many keratin smoothing treatments. You're used to the flat iron compression so much. She goes like this. She goes, when I drink a can of soda, my husband always laughs at me because I always dent the can when I'm drinking because I'm so used to just gripping.
She's got that girl power, huh? That strength.
Right? So you ever do that? And all you hairdressers out there, how hard do you grip your cans when you're drinking something? Do you crush your cans?
The funny thing is, I was teaching Tuesday morning, and we were doing keratin bonds here. I had a couple of new hairdressers that have never seen it before. So they're like, whoa, what is that? And part of what I was teaching that same day, I was having a problem with a client on the East Coast that was asking about her tool not heating evenly. And she sent a video. And I think I'm somewhere in between what you're talking about or what you might do and what she does. My problem is most people don't squeeze hard enough. Now, yes, some people squeeze too hard and break tools, but I think pressure is a big part of a keratin tip bond. I'm going to go back to tension in a minute because I think that's more the subject today. But since you brought that up, I have always talked about a K-tip or keratin bond. Let's say this is the bond, is the client's hair, and you put the two together and you put a tool on both sides and you're squeezing it to some degree, right? That is an unmeasurable thing. How hard do you squeeze? And that's the creativity of hairdressers, and the part that gets hard to to have robots do, because it's more of a feel thing and it's a little different for everybody. How thick is your keratin? How thin is it? How hot is your tool? And then how hard do you press? And so I literally counseled them to squeeze harder because I was watching in the video and it looked like they just barely touched it. And if you barely touch it and you take this wad of keratin and it just touches it and heats a little, look, it might just heat halfway through. It might not even get the part that's touching the client's hair soft if there's not some pressure. So you're saying don't squeeze too hard. I'm saying don't squeeze too soft. Somewhere in the middle is right. And so I noticed that if you're squeezing this keratin, it should spread, right? It should spread as it gets heated, but it also should spread, but then it also should push through all the fibers of the hair. And so if you don't squeeze enough, you don't get it to intermingle with all the hair fibers before you roll it or fold it. And that's a challenge a lot of people have. They touch it really quick with a 7,000 degree little heating element tool. Then
they sit there and they tap. Like, I don't know what the hell that's all about.
That should be a whole nother video.
That should be a whole video.
Yeah, how and why the heat works with keratin bonds, because K-tips are sensitive to heat and pressure. And so I said you need to lower the temperature. I'm going to finish with this. You have to lower the temperature of your machine, press a little bit harder and a little bit longer, because I see it spreading and then they stop. It has to spread and then it has to sink. And so I said, if you just press a little harder, lower the temperature of machine so you have to wait a little bit longer, and then roll it really quickly after, because that's the other problem. They put the tool down and then they just look at it for a little while. I don't know, maybe take a bite of their chips or take a sip of drink. Then they go to roll it or fold it. Well, it's very heat sensitive. So after they come back from the bathroom or whatever they do on the break in between setting the tool down and rolling it or folding it, and yes, I'm being a little sarcastic, it's cooling down. So time matters. Get rid of that freaking tool really quickly and roll it or fold it. Instead, they do that and then they go, Yeah, I'd like something from McDonald's also. I'm gonna roll this bun here just a few seconds, and like give me a half and half sweet unsweetened tea. And then they go to roll it, and they're like, "There's something wrong with this manufacturer. The bun doesn't even roll." Yeah, of course, it's somebody else's fault because you waited 10 minutes to roll the bun. So, I mean, every little step matters. But let's get back to tension because it matters also, right?
Yes, I could feel the tension. I could feel.
I get so passionate about it. It's like some of it just seems like common sense to me, and common sense is not so common.
we see we see so much insanity. Like people think we make these things up, and I tell people we cannot make these things up.
We
Some
don't
of
need
the,
to. We don't need to.
it's just mental. Like some of the things people say and ask and send us videos of them doing, I don't even understand how that made any sense.
I like the videos though because it helps a lot. I try really hard not to make fun of people in the videos when I see something and I'm like, did you even watch the online training? There's nothing like them. But let me just help them where they are.
Well, we're helping. It's
Right.
the point is to try to help.
Right.
That's really what this is all
And that's
about.
what I love about the videos because I appreciate so much if someone is willing to send a video and then take personal responsibility because that's how you learn.
That's how
But
you learn. Yeah.
But when people say it's not working, must be the manufacturer's fault, and it's clear it's your fault, Eddie, that they're messing up. Then I get a little frustrated. But the tension thing, okay, so look, we talked about no tension and no tension and tension hair extensions. I love that it rhymes a little bit. And now we did kind of take each category and say there's no such thing as zero, like absolute zero in temperature. There's no such thing as absolute zero on no tension. Just the weight of the freaking hair is tension, right? Some tension. And then the weight of an extension is going to be some tension in a non-tension technique. And then on the side with tension, there's so many different variations of tension, more or less, depending on how bad you want to be. But you can have mild tension, even in a hand-tied technique, a sewn in, a cornrow braid with a weft sewn on there. It can be mild tension, and some people can perform very well with that if they have thicker, coarser, strong-rooted hair. Fine, it'll work fine.
So then here's a question for you.
Go ahead.
At a minimum, regardless of what type of hair extension method is being used, like which doesn't matter the technique, at a minimum, what happens with tension when you over direct, when you don't apply to natural fall?
Wait, what? What happens?
So when you take a section that you're going to attach the hair to, right?
Mm-hmm.
You should, regardless of what technique you're using, you should apply it to natural fall. But there are some people will pull it up a little bit. They'll squeeze a whole bunch into one.
Before we even get to that, I was going to say, I think we've well established the difference, the broad difference between tension and non-tension, right? Tension is going to be really close to the head, and non-tension is going to leave a little bit of space, like in a K-tip, an I-tip, a beaded tip, even our beaded weft. It might be the only weft that is a non-tension technique, because most wefts are put right up against the scalp, whether it's glued on or sewed on. And so the on-stage beaded weft is the only weft that I know of that is a non-tension technique. So
you physically cannot put it up too close to the head.
I don't even think I thought of that before, that we're the only weft that is a non-tension weft technique. That's huge. So let's talk about, there's so much to talk about even on the non-tension. So non-tension is the goal, right? So don't do hand-tied extensions anymore. Is that too strongly opinionated? Non-tension is the goal. Even a K-tip, an I-tip, a beaded tip, an on-stage weft, and there might be other techniques I'm not familiar with, but get away from the scalp a little bit. But then let's talk about just non-tension techniques for a minute. Like you said, there's right and there's wrong things to do in that category. So one of my puppy dogs just came back to visit. Lay down, boy. You're gonna have to be good while we're online, okay? And so with the non-tension technique, if you pull hair from a section that's this wide, obviously it's like that, but let's say it's this wide, and you pull all the hair to the center to roll a bond, even in a keratin tip, that is going to be slightly more tension than the technique that's a flat bond where the hair comes out wide and stays wide, and you fold the bond over and then it flows straight through. So that was one of the first things I wanted to mention, is that even in an individual bond, you can go from a pulling it like a ponytail, because even you put a girl's hair in a ponytail, nobody would think about that as pulling hair from here to here when it really wants to hang here. It's that feeling of when you take the ponytail out and you go, oh, that feels good. Well, that's because your hair was pulled in a position it didn't want to be in. And so when you do a whole bunch of little bitty keratin tips, little bitty extensions, even eye tips, you're pulling hair like that. With a flat bond in a K-tip and an onstage beaded tip, the hair goes, if you get your section the width of the bond itself and it goes straight in there, because ours, when you squeeze that bead, it squeezes flat and wide. And if you didn't make your section too wide, which some people do, then it's on the hairdresser. But if you do it correct and your section is just as wide as that tip, then only flat bonds and K-tips and onstage beaded tips can be a true non-tension technique. And now let's go into what you're talking about, the angle of the
angle. And the reason why I want to bring that up is because it has become such a prevalent issue in society overall that they've even now coined, we have an official term for it. It's traction alopecia.
Yep.
So it's such a recognizable issue nowadays that we really do have to be considerate when applying hair extensions, that we are not over directing, whether we're over directing up, straight up, or sideways, or pinching in a whole bunch of hair. And let's explain why that's even done. Each one of those things, why they're even done.
So let's take this for example. Well, let me give you the face side of it.
Sure.
If you take a section, I'm going to do a little bigger, a lot bigger than you would normally, but let's say you take your extension section like this and you pull it straight towards you, is what most people do. They pull it
90 degrees straight off the head.
And then they squeeze their bead in an onstage technique or put a keratin tip and roll it on there, and it's nice and secure on this section, and then watch what happens. It falls down. Can you see what's happening?
Yeah, it starts the bottom half. The top half keeps it nice and tense, tension, but the bottom half starts like collapsing.
Yeah, I say it buckles or it wiggles or it gets loose. Well, that's a challenge, right? Because it's probably even better if I often draw it on a head, and I'll draw on a section. Are you kidding me? My pen stopped writing. They'll have that section, and that's the back of a head, and they pull it straight out, put their keratin tip on there, and then I'm gonna draw right here what it looks like when it hangs. That very top section hangs tight, and
the bottom half collapses underneath it.
Yeah, and then sort of like that bottom half, you can kind of see where it where's it at? Right here, where it kind of it goes up. So none of the hairs on the head through here are supporting the weight of this extension hanging down.
I pointed my finger into the screen to show it as if we're right next to each other.
But you see, I taught that for years also. And so if you pull it towards you or up, it's almost like what would you call half on or off base, kind of when you're rolling a roller.
When you're doing a blow dry
right.
or roller or something.
Kind of that up part. And so that bottom part, so 90% of the hairs in that section aren't even holding the weight of what's going on. So we're not saying that, if you go from tension to non-tension, all your problems are solved. No, here's the whole reason why you still need a freaking class, is because there's still a learning curve to get the better technique done even better.
Better, yeah.
It's a good start, but go ahead.
That buckling part, whatever you want to call it, when that starts growing out, because this is my words of wisdom to everybody out there, and you've heard me repeat this, I repeat this all the time. The problem never presents itself within the first week after the client leaves. The problem,
depending on the strength of the person's hair, because fine,
Okay,
fine,
fair.
you know what I'm saying? Fine, thin hair compared to thick, coarse hair, amount of hairs per square inch, or somebody with medium to fine hair, but is blown out with bleach and it's really weak and fragile, and you do it wrong, they're gonna experience, let's say there's 50 hairs in that little section that you're connected to, and you do it at that wrong angle. So maybe just a 10 or 20 across the top of that section are holding the weight. So then when it hangs down, 30 or 40 in there are not holding the weight. Well, those 10, they start breaking.
They're gonna snap. Oh yeah.
They're gonna start breaking, and you might start experiencing some of the problems within the first day or two or a week or two like yours. So I would say most of the time, you're right, most of the time the problems don't present themselves on that day, but that is what causes a little pain, little red bumps. So like, why do I have little red bumps on my head? It's like, well, it's each hair is getting pulled more than it should, and it's forming a little blister around each strand of hair that's hanging way too heavy on your head. So then you get itching, you get pain, you get blisters, you get some scratching, then you get traction alopecia. Traction just means pulling, and so then the alopecia means bald. So you're losing hair, just a few hairs at a time, but those 10 at the top of the section fall out, and it drops to the next section, before you know it, all 40 or 50 strands are pulled right out of the head, and the extension is on the dance floor.
And if they don't, that's where the matting, the tangling, that's where it all turns into a hot mess. That's where you start hearing all these horror stories that hair extensions is bad for the hair, or hair extensions causes damage to the hair. That's where all these misnomers come from, is because 2, 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, all of a sudden you got a big old ball on the side of your head, whether it's the size of a ping pong, a golf ball, a baseball. The biggest knot I've ever seen was the size of a freaking softball, Bernard. It was mental. But the woman was in so much, unfortunately, she was in so much pain, she just gave up on touching her head altogether. And it just grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. It was rough, man. That took. That's why I always say the punishment should not be going to jail for crime. The punishment should be brushing out tangles. That nobody would ever commit a crime ever again if you had to suffer through trying to brush out a tangle.
Take out our tangles with no pain and keep brushing till it's all gone. It would literally take you days if you did it right, but you end up having a razor through, and that could possibly be a video also, because I mean, I got these 2 big golden doodles here, and they grow long hair, and it gets matted in certain places, sometimes around the ears, around their chin, and they call them dematting combs. They're freaking razor blades, They look like a comb, but you go in the mat, and when you pull through, you razor through some of the hair. And most people think, oh, the dog's fine. It needs its hair thinned anyway. It'll be a little cooler. It won't matter. But on a person's head, nobody wants to lose any hairs, right? You wouldn't put a dematting comb through although they have them, but that's a whole nother topic and subject. Like, how much hair are you willing to, because if somebody's completely, let's take dreadlocks, for example, that's mats, right?
Sure.
Do you go from dreadlocks to this, to just, well, that's some extensions in there, but do you just go where you can put your fingers through it? Can you comb dreadlocks out ever?
It would take you a year and a half to do it probably, but
right. Most people shave their head and start over, right? And so when you got 1 or 2 dreads in your hair accidentally, or you didn't know, or you didn't take care of it, or you were in a coma and you wake up and the nurses weren't brushing your hair correctly, you do get sick and you're in bed for a week or 2 and you're not taking care of your hair the same, sometimes you get some matting, and you've got to get those mats out. There are some tips and techniques and tricks to lose as little hair as possible and still look like you have a lot of hair and you didn't shave that spot. There are tips and tricks for that. But all of that, it comes from non-tension and tension techniques and doing either one of them right or wrong. So even in a non-tension world where, yes, we started off with no tension, you can still have some tension because you put it in at a wrong or bad angle. But you talked about like just doing it up at an angle and then it falls down. So you want that as a natural fall as possible. And I talked about taking too wide or too tall of a section.
What happens when what happens when in those situations?
So similar. And that is funny because I see that in hand tied quite a bit, is they take a section that's like 2 inches wide, skinny, so it's 2 inches, and they pull all the hair to the center and push a bead on it and squeeze it, and you just see that hair going, and then sticking out. But the hair's pulled from way over here, and I mean, I even like, oh God, I'm seeing it in pictures and videos, and I'm like, oh, rubbing my own head, like that has got to hurt. So I don't think there's a one simple answer here. I think like what we were just talking about, it all comes into the consultation, the evaluation of the client's hair. And that's what, unfortunately, you learn through experience, right? We have screwed some heads up to get to the point where we can sound like authorities here, right? But so many clients had to suffer for us to get so smart. And I am so sorry to all you know, I've made some big mistakes over the time, you know, and some little ones, and tried as much as possible to learn from other people's mistakes. But
I learned from all your mistakes. I never goof anybody's hair.
Unfortunately, I was on, I don't know, what would you call it when people were going west? You know, I was on the frontier.
Well, like the gold rush.
Well, on the
or
frontier,
the settlers.
well, even before that, there was just nobody living in the West, and they were just going west because the land was free and new and possibly better. Well, you don't know what's ahead of you. Indians, the plague, the locusts, you know, you don't know what's ahead of you till when you're the first one. So for me, extensions, getting into these non-tension techniques, I had clients that wanted newer and better, and I'm going to the classes, and there's like 10, 15 people in the class, but they're coming from all over the country, and we're going back to our cities. There's no social media. There's no staying in contact with these people. So you learn a little bit at the class, and then you leave. You're in your town, and you're just like, I got to try to make this client happy, not hurt, love her hair, and pay a lot of money and come back. That's how I'm thinking. And so I'm trying to get it done, and I'm cutting the keratin bonds shorter. Immediately, they're loving the non-tension technique as I'm getting better at the angle. But then I would unfortunately experience a lady with very fine, thin hair and put too few hairs in each strand, and some do start to fall out and cause bald spots. Then I learned, oh, the amount of hair holding the extension hair matters. The amount, the sheer number of hairs. And it's not necessarily the number of hairs. If their hair is fine and thin, it takes more hairs. I guess it is the number of hairs, but it has to do with how big each hair is, right? So thick, coarse hair, if the hair that the person's getting extensions is more coarse than the extensions you're putting in, then 30 of the client's hairs might be able to support 50 of the extension client's hairs. But then you get to this fine, thin client where she's going through, usually thinner clients are going through the shedding process faster. Also, a finer, thinner, weaker root, the hair's getting squeezed off and made thinner for other hair loss challenges and problems and reasons we're not going to talk about today. But that particular client has smaller hairs. It might take 70 or 80 of her hair strands, which might actually need to come from a little bit bigger section. And you might have to sacrifice a little bit of pulling hair off of where natural fall is to get a bond in. You have to slightly risk that while you're risking a little more hair in a section. And I even have a trick for that. You don't have to go as wide. You have to go deeper. And when you go deeper and you stay at natural fall, I know I'm talking about my hands, I hope it's helping. But when you're going deeper and you go into natural fall, you got to be a little further away from the head for that bond to stay in, because you got to be a certain distance under the bottom part of that section. Because as you get above the bottom part of the section, that's when the strand starts to lift up.
That's what we were just showing earlier in the little, So
I need more hairs, like 70 hairs, to support these 50 hair piece of extension that I'm putting in. Of course, people are going to say, cut the bonds in half. Do we have comments coming in? I never did click on the comments side.
Yeah, you're a trailblazer is what that was about.
Trailblazer.
Is taking a little bit larger section. I know that's very situational, but are you accounting for natural shedding? Is that part of it as well too?
Yeah. So if you're watching this right now, can y'all hit the like button, please? People need to see this. I think this would help a lot of hair extensionists do a little better job with extensions. I'm getting into the nitty gritty here, but you need to subscribe too. Subscribe, like, and if you could do all three and comment, this would really help us out. But subscribe doesn't take anything away from your life, but it would sure help us out. You know, they'll give us another one of these things over here, and it would just get more people to see this. So you were saying, oh man, there's just so much that I have been doing this a little over 30 years. So
Well, I think people don't consider the shedding part. So they think if I only take
Right.
3 strands of hair, and that's going to be better because I'm not taking so much of their natural hair.
Good
But then
point.
if 2 of those strands naturally shed, as hair will do every day, which we have no control, just because the hair is attached to the bond or to the extension or to the weft or to the whatever, doesn't mean that hair is going to stay in that head. So all of a sudden, those 3 strands now becomes 1 or 2. Yeah, that's going to add some stress.
So let's use some real numbers. You say I'm 1 or 2. Nobody's hooking extensions to 3 strands unless they're doing that
You'd be surprised.
Well, I was getting ready to say, unless they're doing that new stupid V-light thing. Just go ahead and put your comments right now that you don't like me because I hate V-light. I haven't even, and this is where people are going to be like, you don't even know because you didn't try it. Right. I haven't tried it. I'm just looking at it thinking, look at all the freaking glue in the hair. All that glue. Oh, you neatly comb through the glue and it doesn't look like glue. Then the removal, that's got to be a pain. And then people are asking if we're selling V-light, but how am I going to sell V-light? You just cut hair off of any dead animal you find and then you put it on the people's hair. You don't have to buy a certain kind of hair. That's the trouble with the V-light thing. I can't control quality. So if I sold the glue and the purple light and said, but you should use my high quality hair. And they're like, yeah, but look, I got this mannequin. I got this dead lady right here. I could just use her hair, right?
But
yeah,
Bernard,
you could. But
Bernard, it's just it's a better version than adhesive, and tape, as you know, according to AI and Google's,
is the
safest type of hair extension for the hair that causes no tension.
I think you brought up a good point about shedding, and I did. Yeah,
I'm going to get you going so good right now.
No, but I blazed over it, and I did bring up the shedding, but I didn't go into detail. And I think your question was really good because that is part of the answer I gave a minute ago, but I want to describe it better. I said people go through the shedding process, but I wasn't clear. Like me, I have some of the thickest, coarsest hair. Now I'm 55 now, and I am like, you see my scalp through here. You used to not be able to see my scalp. Yeah. So my hair was like twice as thick before. And in my 20s and 30s and even early 40s, if I took in a shower with a dark floor, you can't see it. But if I'm in a white shower or a white tub, my dark hair, I'm starting to get some white hair now, but my dark hair would never, hardly ever show in the tub or the shower. I know the length of my hair because my wife's hair is longer and it's dark too. And I'd see it in the shower or the tub. She started shedding earlier than I did, or she'd go through the shedding process. But I literally would see one hair in the tub or the shower maybe every week or two. It was like, I don't know when or why or how my hair would shed, but it just didn't hardly go through the shedding process. And now every time I bathe, I will see 5 to 10 hairs in the tub or in the shower. I see them now. And so I know it's partly age related that we haven't talked about, but also what my experience was with clients when I was doing a lot of extensions, you have to take a lot of these into consideration. The age of the client, the size of each hair, the amount of hairs per square inch. And what I found, and none of this is 100%, which makes it even more difficult, but for the most part, the thinner and finer a person's hair is, and you can kind of tell where it's got a lot of breakage in this area, or where they think is breakage, it's hairs falling out and regrowing, and they're not all grown out at the same time. So finer, thinner haired clients tend to go through the shedding process faster, right? So even if they have all the hairs per square inch on their head, if the average hair person shedding, God, the books say all kind of things, but let's just say 50 hairs a day. If the average person is shedding 50 a day, that's why I call it an average, because Bernard was shedding 0 hairs a day, and
you messed everybody up.
and miss so and so
100, you were shedding 0.
Right, you might be shedding 100, I'm shedding 0, and that's where we get this average in the middle. And so what I started to find was that if a person had finer, thinner hair and they complained about shedding and they had a bunch of different lengths in their hair as they were growing it out to here, and then they want extensions to thicken it or lengthen it, I would say, you know what? Not only do I need, let's just assume a hair extension is about 50 strands in there. I think it's actually a little bit more, but let's just say it's 50 strands. And I just got this this chunk of extensions. I got to get a chunk of the client's hair, and it's really got to feel about the same is the starting point, right? So if it's thick coarse hair, like I was saying before, 40 strands might support 50, but 40 in a little ponytail might actually feel like the 50 because one is a little bigger hair than the other, right? But then if you go to fine thin hair, it might take, like I was saying earlier, 70 strands to feel the same thickness as those 50 hairs of extensions. But the other thing that you just brought up was a good point. We also need that 70 or 80 because over the extensions stay in a little while, right? 2-3 months. Over that time, most people are shedding hair, but this finer, thinner hair client is shedding more hair, more hair per day. And so out of those 70 hairs, how many hairs are still going to be there holding that extension in 2 or 3 months? So the other side of it is be a good counselor to your client and say, if you have thicker, coarser hair, you don't have to say it like that, but you can say most people can go 3 or 4 months with extensions, but with your finer, thinner hair, you're going through the shedding process a little faster. Your hair's a little more fragile. I'd like to evaluate your hair and get a good look at you each month if I'm not doing your color or highlight. And you may only be able to go 2.5 months with your extensions instead of the 3 or 4. Be nice to your client and her hair and make the right recommendation. But because you grabbed more hairs and you're holding on to more hairs, so they might get down to 40 hairs at 3 months. They might be able to go 3 months if you were smart enough to put more hair in the section to support it longer. That also goes into one more thing, half bonds or full bonds. You see, I learned early on that fine, thin hair actually works better with full keratin bonds or K-tip bonds. Most people are saying, oh, you got to do half bonds or third of a bond or a fourth of a bond. You got to do half bonds that are smaller and more invisible and less visible and less
hair, less
on the
section of
client
hair,
and less hair it's hanging from. So when they go through that shedding process, now they only get a month and a half out of their extensions because you didn't put enough in each one. Now you can grow that little section even a little more for that half bond, but truly, if you're going to cut everything in half and say, now we're going to put a 25 hair extension on 35 or 40 hairs, that shedding issue is going to be more of a problem in that half bond than it is on the full bond because you just have a bigger section of hair to hold on to. And the full bond, in my experience for many, many years, and I've tried it both ways, that's why you can't really argue with me about this or tell me I'm wrong. I have lived it. I've done it on people's heads, and I've done it on many people's heads. And a full bond, sure, it might not be able to hide in the hair as well, but I'm pretty good at extensions and I made them hide really well. Yours might not hide really well, and that's your problem. But if you do
when you come to a class, you can learn how to not make it your problem.
Yeah, right. Well, and that's the thing. The round bonds, the flat bonds aren't all the best bond, one or the other, on every single head and every place of the head. Sometimes a round bond on a certain part of the head looks better, and you can mix some round bonds and flat bonds, and you can mix some half bonds in the areas where it matters more. And so then you don't have half bonds on the whole head, which doubles your application time. Also, are you raising your price for that? Or is it worth all that extra work? You already takes a long time to put keratin tips in. Why would you want to double the amount of time? And I know it's because you think it's better.
That makes sense.
It's not. Yeah.
We talk a lot about the application process itself. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time also talking about the application process, which is very, very important. Another thing that I think gets overlooked a lot, or at least gets glazed over a lot, is the maintenance and how important the maintenance is from the client side once they go home. We spend so much time trying to figure out the best way to do it, but we have to understand over the lifetime of how long these extensions are going to live, 2 months, 3 months, in some cases even longer, we are only with the client that one day. We might see them in between every 6 to 8 weeks for a color, a blow dry, a haircut, or something. That client is home every single day with themselves 24 hours a day. Being able to properly brush your hair out, and when I say properly brush your hair out, matters so much, because I've seen clients rip through their hair with the brush. They pay no mind, and they don't give no crap about what's going on at their scalp. They just want to get through the length of that hair extension. And if a couple of strands get pulled out, they just chalk it up to, well, at least I got it brushed out and it's not tangled anymore. It's like, yeah, but you just literally tore through the extension itself, which is now weakening the attachment area. And you've also torn through your scalp, your follicles at some point to some degree. So you're hurting the root of your hair as well. What do you think the maintenance? I mean, the maintenance. I get really, you get messed up about the adhesives and the glue stuff, which I'm with you. But man, when I see people not taking care of the maintenance side of things, that gets me going just as much. That
Well,
gets my
that's when you end up with the tangles and the knots and the mats and traction alopecia. Also, it's not. So it goes right back to my three-legged stool.
Oh
You know?
yeah, true. That's great actually for this.
Yeah. So, where are the problems coming from? I went all the way back to the root of the problems, and it came from what we were joking about earlier. I'm doing it wrong, but it must be the manufacturer. Well, you know what? Where could the problems be is what I started to think about. And I started to realize, you know what? Sometimes it is the manufacturer. There are mistakes done in all areas. Who all could mess up? Me, the client, and the manufacturer.
Mhm.
Now, there are a few other side factors, but for the most part, those are the three big ones. I mean, sure, you could have a friend come by and cut your hair and while you're sleeping. You could get your hair caught in a car door, but I would think that would still be on the client. There's a lot of little side things that could happen. My dog ate my hair while I was sleeping, but for the most part, there's three categories. And if I always said that hair extensions, or the success of hair extensions, is like a three-legged stool. If one of those legs is not working well, the whole stool falls down. So then the other two get bad credit also. Kind of like why most people think hair extensions are damaging in the US, mostly because of the hairdressers, not because of manufacturers, and not because of the clients. Somewhat the client, but mostly the hairdressers. So we were trying to put heavy, thick wefts with a lot of tension on people that couldn't handle it and were pulling their hair out. And so as we got smarter with it, the three-legged stool is the manufacturer could make some bad hair, or you could just buy hair from a low quality manufacturer and just expect the problems because you got crappy hair to start with. Or it could be you as the stylist putting the hair in wrong. You could be just not doing the best possible, highest quality, best technique, but you're not doing the technique the way it's supposed to be done, the best technique. So you can mess up a good thing just by being a bad hairdresser, And then that third one, I think you started to touch on just now, is the client. We can do everything right with the best hair in the world, and we can't control all the clients. And sometimes you have to be confident enough and bold enough to say, you are the problem, lady. Miss Client.
We got to teach you how to brush your hair right. We got to teach you how to style your hair right. This thing of like my favorite thing is, I done hair extensions on the client, and she's having a problem. I go, well, how is she taking care of her hair? Oh, perfectly. She never touches it. I'm like, what? She goes, yeah. She just lets it air go wrong. Never touches it and nothing. So she puts no heat, no brush, no this, no that. I'm like, well, then she ain't taking care of nothing. What the hell? She's neglecting everything. Like, that in itself is a neglect.
I know I've covered this once before, but I know this client's name and I remember the face. And yep, that was the dog that did that a little while ago. This lady, she said, and it was a hair system on her head, hair replacement. She said, this hair replacement system's falling apart just like the last one. I said, but you had so many years of success. How is it just the top of your hair all of a sudden, not the sides?
And two in a row.
You know what? She's not with us any longer. Her name was Lisa. I won't go into her last name, but I said, Miss Lisa, after I shampoo your hair, I'm going to have you brush out the tangles. I want you to show me, let's just start with a starting point. Maybe it's in the styling. Maybe it's in the living. Maybe it's in the wild sleeping that you not even aware of. But let's just start with the one thing I can control right here. Let's see how you brush your hair. And she throws her head over, and I'm going to show you with this mannequin what she does. She comes over and she starts doing this. I was freaking out. She leans over like this and she just starts going. It literally sounded like this. And then she pops and I just let her go but I was like, I was stunned. She pops up and she goes, that's all I do. And I was like, well, we just found your problem. Do you ever see me brush your hair like that? You can't just, it looked like you're slapping yourself in the head with the brush, literally. And she said, it's just real light over the surface. I said, I can hear the bristles hitting your head and scratching your head.
So when she drinks a can of soda, she crushed the can.
Probably. She's a can crusher. That's going to be a whole, yeah, that's going to be like code between us when somebody messes up. Like, is she a can crusher? Yeah. And so that comes from years of experience, just like a lot of people are having some trouble. And I'm thinking, I say a few people are having trouble, but most are not. Like when they buy hair extensions from us, people will, you know, call up and say, are people having problem with color number 6?
Yeah, of all the right, such a common color.
You are apparently, and nobody else is.
But then, even before you finish your point, even on the opposite end of that, I've seen people where they will literally tilt their head over and just so gently be brushing through their hair. And I'm saying,
good point.
That is nice, but you ain't supporting. You're not supporting the hair. You're just sitting there going through.
And that wasn't the proper brush to use on extensions. I mean, you have loop brushes for some extensions and you have boar bristle brushes for other extensions. And so use the proper brush. And you're right. You do need to get down to the scalp, but not with a vent brush, not with a brush with, I mean, this is my favorite Paul Mitchell brush for most people's hair. I got a lot of hair in it now, but this is most people's hair, not extensions, not hair replacement. Now, hair replacement, these little balls are soft and gentle on the scalp, unless you're doing like that. But when you're brushing through, you need a little firmer bristle brush or a loop brush, depending on which, and you do need to go a little firmer. Like you're saying, you do need to get all the way next to the scalp, maybe even part your hair off and pick it up and get that underneath side, but soft and gentle. How do you say that? Firm, but soft and gentle, you know, all the way down to the scalp, but not rake it fast. Go slow enough.
You shouldn't feel your hair. So I say like this, I say, no, I'm a rocker. So I say no head banging. Yeah. If you're doing this, or if you're doing this, Night at the Roxbury or whatever, I don't know.
Yes.
If you have What Is Love song going through your head and you're doing that.
Don't hurt me. You want to sing together right now?
Right.
Grab your mic. I think we're done with this topic.
But yeah, all right. So that's what that's about. Look, tension is a serious thing. You know, we try to tackle these topics. You know, we try to keep it light. We get passionate at times. It matters. That's the whole thing. It really, really matters to us, and we want to help people. We want to make this
tension matters.
Awareness. Yeah.
Cause none. Goodbye.
Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next week.
Like, subscribe.